everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be doing my May wrap-up, and I'm super excited to do this one because May was a very good reading month for me. I was very happy with the amount that I read, with the quality of books that I read, and I was able to get some things off of the TBR that I had been meaning to read for a very long time. So it felt like a very accomplished month, and I was excited to finally get to a lot of it. And I'm excited to talk about the books with everybody here. So I will jump into it because I do have a bit to say about each of the selections, and I will go through them just in the order in which I read them. Also, just going to show you my really cute May reading journal spread, which was green eggs and ham, and I thought was really cute, and I got to do some little sketches because Dr. Seuss's sketches are just silly and easy to do for someone who is not that artistically inclined. So we will get into the books. The first book that I read or listened to this month was Outlaw, or last month I guess, was Outlaw by Jim Butcher. So this was the new Dresden Files novella. I got to discuss this with some friends, so I can link that conversation down below if you haven't seen it. It was a really fun discussion and I would recommend checking it out. But going back into Dresden, especially so soon after a new Dresden book came out, was really nice. I think we've been spoiled this year as Dresden fans, and it's been nice to spend so much time with those characters in that world. Obviously, I can't say a lot about this novella because it is so far down the line in an ongoing series, but for any Dresden fans who have not yet picked up the novella, who plan to at some point in the future, I will say that this felt like a throwback to early Dresden. So it felt, not necessarily in writing, because I think that Jim Butcher has come quite a long way in the last couple of decades, but in terms of just tone and atmosphere, it felt like that gritty noir kind of feeling that you had more in the beginning of Dresden versus some of the bigger kind of fantasy epic things that are happening further down the line in the series. So if you are nostalgic for those early days of Dresden, I think that you would really enjoy this novella. Putting out a novella like this, I think, is a very specific skill for writers because you need to make it interesting enough for the diehard fans to read it and feel like they've had a good time reading it, but also it can't have so much inside that the people who are following along with the series but decide not to pick up the side stories, there can't be too much in there that they're going to otherwise miss. And I think that Jim Butcher balances that necessity really well. So overall, I had no complaints about this novella. I gave it 4 stars. I had a great time reading it, and I'm sure I'll listen to it again sometime in the future. The second book of the month was also an audiobook, and this is one that has been carried over. I can't remember if I started it in March or if it was early April, but it has been ongoing for quite some time, and that is Anna Karenina. So Anna Karenina and I have quite the history. I started it for the very first time in 2008 when I lived in Europe for a period of time. So as a student, I lived and worked in Europe at a Canadian war memorial site. And I lived in a group house. It was a house with 10 people in it. And part of what would happen in that house is we would all buy books, and people who had lived there for years and years past had bought books and left them. And it was kind of like a My Little Library, but inside this French townhouse. And so I left a book there at the end of the summer and brought back with me this really old, battered copy of Anna Karenina. And I read probably, I don't know, 400 pages or something on the plane on the way back. And then just never finished it. Not because I wasn't having a good time, not because I wasn't enjoying it, but because I just jumped into my final semester or my final year of university as soon as I got back, and I just didn't have time. So Anna Karenina was left behind. Then I picked it up on an Audible sale and decided, you know what, this is the time. I am going to finally read through Anna Karenina. And I'm really glad that I did. I also gave this 4 stars. It's very difficult to give a star rating or to judge in any way a book that has been as important and influential as Anna Karenina because you're coming at it from multiple places, or at least I was. So I came at it from the, why is this book important? How has it impacted the literary landscape? What did it mean for the history and development of the novel as a whole? And also, in terms of pure enjoyment at this time, how much did I like it? And it got me thinking a lot about why we read, like Joanna's series that she does, Why We Read, and what the novel means to people now versus what the novel meant to people hundreds of years ago. And I think this is part of the value of reading classics. Not only does it introduce you to a style of writing, to a sort of language, to a vocabulary that has changed and shifted over time. It also introduces you or reminds you of cultural shifts, cultural values, how the world has changed, the history of, in this case specifically, Russia or Europe, what events were impacting people at that time, but just why we gravitate towards literature and what we get out of it. And I think the answer to that is probably very different in 2026 than it was several hundred years ago. So Anna Karenina had me thinking not just of the themes of the novel, which were interesting on their own. I don't know if this is the case for everyone, but Anna Karenina for me is enough part of the public literary consciousness that I already knew what was going to happen. Like I know the plot. I knew the plot of Anna Karenina. I knew what to expect, the general kind of rise and fall of it. But it was still fascinating. It was still interesting to dissect, the themes, to look at the characters, to feel the emotions. But much more so than that, it just had me thinking about reading in general and reminded me of why I will continue to scatter classics into what I read and why I do think it's important to do that. Everybody obviously doesn't have to read classics, but I do think there is value in them beyond just reading something that a lot of people decided or a select group of people decided that we should like and believe are important. So take from that what you will, but I had a good time reading Anna Karenina, finally getting around to finishing it, and it was a 4-star read for me. The audiobook was okay. It was one of the Audible exclusives that are narrated by celebrities, and I have enjoyed a lot of those ones. I've talked about Anne of Green Gables a lot. That's one of my favorite ones, narrated by Rachel McAdams. This one was narrated by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and I just thought it was okay, unfortunately. I think it could have been more emotional. I don't know. It was not to my specific taste, but it also wasn't terrible. It was fine to listen to. And the third book of the month is the last audiobook, so I guess I was really heavy audio up front and then not as much afterwards. But the third audiobook was one that I was very much looking forward to listening to, and that is London Falling, which is the most recent work of nonfiction by Patrick Radden Keefe. If you have followed the channel for any amount of time, you know that Patrick Radden Keefe is one of my favorite authors in the sphere of narrative nonfiction. So he wrote Say Nothing was really popular. Oh gosh, I can't remember what the opiate one is called now, which is his most famous one about the Sackler family and the opiate crisis. Oh my gosh. Empire of Pain. There we go. My brain is not firing on all cylinders. Empire of Pain and Say Nothing are probably his most popular works. And I think this new edition from him was highly anticipated and I think really, really enjoyable, in so much as that, you can say that a book about this topic is enjoyable. But this was another 4-star read for me. Not my favorite from him, but I don't think I've ever had a bad time listening to a book of his. This follows the story of Zach Bretler, who was a 19-year-old boy who washed up in the Thames in 2020, I think, around the early time of the coronavirus pandemic. And the circumstances of his death were suspect. It was, I think, officially labeled that he had taken his own life, that he had jumped into the river, but there were a lot of strange circumstances around his death. His parents didn't feel that that was accurate. There was a lot of controversy around the investigation into his death, and this book tackles that in a very similar way to Say Nothing. The way that the stories are built feels very similar, just from a function point of view, the way that they're written, a structural point of view. You get the story of Zach Bretler and his family, and then you get the history of people in London and the flow of wealth in London, especially in modern times, and specifically about rich oligarchs who have come into London from other countries within Europe or Asia and have spent a lot of money in the London real estate market, and then have, in this book, there's a lot of evidence there have been some people that have come over and have maybe been able to commit crimes that would not have otherwise been possible. And it is certainly suggested in the book that the police force in London had probably been in on a lot of these events. And what I will say about Patrick Radden Keefe is that he presents topics, especially topics that can be difficult or sensitive with a lot of care. There's very little conjecture. There's very little judgment. It's hard to read one of his books and imagine, what is his personal opinion on something, because I think that he tries his best to maintain that factual and unbiased outlook, and it works really well. But he's also very good at weaving the narrative part of the nonfiction. So the parts that are about specific families, and in this particular case, the Brettler family, feels so realistic. And he talks a little bit about this at the end of the book and says, I had the option here of talking with Zach's parents, and we spent hours and hours and hours together. And so if this feels more like a true story or feels as if I were there, it's just because I had such open access to sources. And then he goes on to tackle some of the questions that have been raised about this book, some of the the opposition to this book. There are certain people who are named in the book who have then said that he has fabricated evidence or that he has put things in that are not true. And then he has kind of outlined where he tried to fact check and reach out and how he tried to go through all that. So it's very fascinating. I think that he, as I said, does an excellent job in writing these books. I think I will pick up whatever he puts out, and even if it's a topic that I know absolutely nothing about, it always ends up being very interesting. So that was one of my most anticipated reads of the year, and it was very good. So happy to report that. The next book was, I picked up a romance that one of my friends had gifted me for Christmas or my birthday, but had gifted me this year, and I just needed something light and airy, and this definitely fit the bill. The name of the book was Whiskey and Sin. And the author's name, I think, I'm trying to remember now, was Emily Rath, maybe? I'll pop it up anyway. It'll be popped up. I gave this one three stars. I thought this was enjoyable, not a favorite romance of all time, but it was definitely light, breezy. It was easy to get through. I think I read it in a couple of hours, and it was just kind of like decompression for my brain. The plot of this one is that it is an Omegaverse romance. And I'm just going to say, if you know what that is, then you know what that is. And if you don't know what that is, you probably don't want to know what that is. So feel free to look it up if you want to. But this one was an Omegaverse romance. It did actually tackle some pretty tough topics. It centers around sexual slavery and really human trafficking, like very deeply difficult subjects. But it's mostly kind of the comforting part that comes after a lot of trauma. So it's about a runaway boy who has been mistreated very badly in his life, and he is found legitimately hobbling down the highway in the middle of the night by this kind of gruff old guy who lives in a cabin in the woods. And he picks him up and says, I'm gonna bandage your leg and I'm gonna help you for a couple of days and then you have to leave. And obviously he doesn't leave. Obviously they fall in love and, are there together in their little cabin in the woods, and it plays out in exactly the kind of way that you would expect it to. But sometimes it's nice to have those. Sometimes you need a book where you know exactly what's going to happen. And I think that's a lot of the appeal with romance in general, especially if you're a person who otherwise likes to read about things that are really intense, or maybe you work in an area that's really intense. Sometimes it's nice to know exactly what you're getting, and romance can provide that. And this book absolutely provided that for me. So was it my favorite romance ever? Probably not, but it was enjoyable and it did the trick. It did exactly what I was hoping it would do. Book number 5 is my book of the month and my book of the year so far, a book that I was told by friend after friend after friend that I needed to pick up and read, and that is Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. Finally, I finished the Live Ship Traders trilogy, and I feel so silly for not having finished it. I did a spoiler discussion of that if you have read Live Ship Traders and you want to go and watch that. But for anybody who just wants to know my opinion on how the trilogy ended, I thought that it ended very well. I have since asked some friends who have told me some of the reasons that they have heard that other people did not enjoy this trilogy. There are specific characters whose arcs they didn't feel ended in a satisfying way. And I can appreciate that. We all like different things. We all find different things satisfying. But for me personally, I think that this trilogy was absolute perfection. I think this book was perfection. It was 900 pages long, so a lot happened, even more than I could comment on in my super long spoiler discussion video. But I was very happy. Robin Hobb continues to be a master of characterization, of writing, and I personally think that the plotting was very good in this one as well. I know that's a common complaint for the end of the Farseer trilogy, that they thought the last book was kind of just a mess plot-wise, but I thought the plotting was very tight in this one. There's a lot of hints that are planted even in the first novel that pay off all the way at the end of the trilogy, and I think it takes a lot of skill to be able to weave a story that well, and I could not ask for better, to be honest. Perfection. 5 stars for Ship of Destiny. Absolutely my favorite book of the year so far. I will be continuing in the realm of the Elderlings, so I am unsure that the Ship of Destiny will stay at the top, but I'm sure it will still remain in the top 10. And the last book is one that I just put out a video about yesterday, and that is Dungeon Crawler Carl. So the first book in the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. And I did read this one, though I have been informed by almost everybody that I have talked to continue on audio, which I probably will. This book, I owned it already. I bought it for Andrew as a Christmas present because I thought that he would like it and think that it was fun, and he doesn't listen to audiobooks. So that is why I had the physical copy. And I'm glad I got to read the first one at least physically, because it was nice to have eyeballs on it, to see it. And there were some fun little sketches and little drawings on some of the pages. So that was nice to see. But I have been convinced I will continue on with audio. I will go audio next time. And I'm looking forward to continuing this series as well. I thought Dungeon Crawler Carl was really fun. I had some qualms with the beginning of the book, with some of the scenarios in the book. I didn't really love a lot of the language centering around female characters and how they came out. One of my very good friends, Derry, has assured me that that is all serving a purpose, and that I should trust Matt Dinniman to take me where I need to go on this story, and I do. I thought that it was very well done. As I said, it had surprising heart. So I went into Dungeon Crawler Carl, which is a mouthful, expecting it to be silly, expecting to laugh, to maybe roll my eyes sometimes, but in a good-natured way. I was not expecting to be so emotional. And that makes sense, I think, because silliness and funniness can only carry you so far. And for this series to have become so overwhelmingly loved by such a wide variety of readers, it has to have something other than just the zippy humor. And that is true. I can see the foundation that Matt Dinniman has put down, the themes that he's going to explore, and I do think that this is going to grow into something that I really enjoy. So very glad that I picked up Dungeon Crawler Carl as well, and I will be continuing that series on audio. So looking forward to that, because everybody says that it's a fantastic audio experience, and I trust them. But that is it. That is my May wrap up. As I said, books that I thought were fantastic. I had a really great time. I was never reading something and wishing for it to be over. Every single thing that I read, I was really into, didn't want it to end, absolutely enraptured, and they all served their purpose for the month. So very happy about that. Ship of Destiny was my book of the month. Got through so many books on my physical TBR that I needed to read, and finally got finished. So that was also a nice accomplishment for the month of May. And that is it. If you read any of these books, please let me know what you thought of them. Please feel free to share what you read in May. I would love to hear about it, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye!